The rain had not stopped for 3 days. And on the night everything changed. Ifeoma was running through it with no shoes on her feet. She did not know where she was running to. She only knew what she was running from. The sound of Madame Beatrice's voice screaming her name through the compound, the sting still fresh across her cheek, and the small folded piece of paper hidden inside her bra that she had risked her life to take. Her chest burned. Her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. Somewhere behind her, a gate slammed, and a dog began barking into the wet darkness. She reached the end of the street and collapsed against a rusted zinc fence, sliding down into the mud, gasping, trembling, praying that the shadows moving on the main road were not Madame's driver come to drag her back. If they caught her tonight, they would kill her. Not with a knife. Not with poison. But slowly, the way they had been killing her for 4 years. With hunger, with silence, with humiliation. With the kind of cruelty that leaves no mark on the outside but hollows a person out from within. She was 19 years old, and she had already buried more dreams than most people bury in a lifetime. But here is the truth the world did not know that night. The truth that would only reveal itself many months later, when powerful men would be found weeping in courtrooms, when a family's empire would crumble to dust, when a secret buried for over 2 decades would finally claw its way to the surface. The girl running barefoot through the rain, the girl everyone called the poor house girl. The girl Madame Beatrice mocked and starved and beat. She was the one holding the key to it all. She simply did not know it yet. Before you go any further, if you are the kind of person who believes that God sees everything, even the things done in secret behind locked gates, type, "I am watching from," and tell us where in the world you are joining this story from tonight. Subscribe now. Because what happened to Ifeoma will not just shock you. It will change how you see every madam, and every house girl, you have ever passed on the street. Like this video if you believe suffering has a purpose. Now let us go back. Let us go back to where it all began, 3 years before that rainy night, in a small village called Amans, where a girl's kindness would become the very thing used to destroy her. Ifeoma grew up in a 2-room mud house with a zinc roof that leaked whenever the rain came heavy, which in that part of Abia State, was often. Her father, Papa Namdi, had been a strong man once, a bricklayer who could carry 2 bags of cement on his shoulders without breaking stride. But a fall from a scaffold 3 years before our story begins had shattered his hip, and since then he sat most days on a low stool outside their house, watching the road, watching his wife struggle, watching his only daughter grow up faster than any child should have to. Her mother, Mama Adiz, sold groundnuts and boiled corn by the roadside. It was not enough. It was never enough. Some nights, the 3 of them shared a single plate of gari soaked in water, and Ifeoma would pretend she was full so that her parents could eat more. She was the kind of girl neighbors pointed to when they wanted to shame their own children. "Why can't you be like Ifeoma?" they would say. "That girl greets every elder in this village. That girl fetches water for old widows without being asked. That girl has never been heard raising her voice. She had a gap in her front teeth that showed whenever she smiled, and she smiled often, even when her stomach was empty, even when her school fees were 3 terms behind, even when the other girls in her class wore new sandals, and she wore ones with soles held together by thread. But there was something else about Ifeoma, something the villagers whispered about in low voices when they thought children were not listening. Something about the day she was born. That girl, old Mama Yuzo would say, rocking on her veranda, chewing her cola nut slowly, that girl did not come into this world quietly. The whole compound heard it. Thunder. In the dry season. No cloud in the sky, and thunder crashed over this village the very hour she was born. My mother, God rest her, she held that baby and she said, "This child will carry something heavy, but she will also carry something the world has lost." Nobody understood what that meant. Not then. Ifeoma herself did not know these things were said about her. All she knew was that she loved her parents, she loved learning, and she desperately wanted to become a nurse one day, so she could heal people the way she wished someone could heal her father's hip. Then, on a dry Tuesday afternoon in July, a sleek black SUV pulled into the village, coughing dust into the air, and everything about Ifeoma's life bent onto a different road. The woman who stepped out of that car wore sunglasses, even though there was no need for them under the shade of the mango tree where she stood. Her name was Chief Mrs. Beatrice Okanji Ibe. And though she smiled sweetly at the village elders who came to greet her, there was something underneath that smile, something cold, something calculating, that made even the chickens scatter from her path. She was in the village, she announced, visiting on behalf of a charity foundation, offering opportunities to hard-working, humble young girls from poor families. She would take one girl back to the city, house her, feed her, train her in housekeeping, and pay her a stipend to send home to her struggling parents. In return, the girl would simply help around Madam's large home in Lagos. It sounded, to a desperate village, like a miracle wrapped in silk. Papa Namdi, from his low stool, watched the woman with narrowed eyes. Something in his gut twisted the moment she smiled. But when Mama Adiz came home that evening and told him what the woman had offered, a stipend that could pay off their debts, could buy medicine for his hip, could feed them for months, he found himself unable to argue against hunger. Just for 1 year, Mama Adiz whispered that night, holding Ifeoma's hands across the small wooden table. 1 year. And then you come home. We will use the money to reopen your school fees. You will become the nurse you always wanted to be. Ifeoma did not want to go. Something cold moved through her chest the first time she saw Madame Beatrice's smile. A smile that never once reached her eyes. But she looked at her father's hip, swollen and crooked beneath his wrapper, and she looked at her mother's hands, cracked from years of hard roadside labor, and she said yes. If only she had known what yes would cost her. The morning she left, her father could not stand from his stool to hug her properly, so she knelt in the dust before him, and he placed both hands on her head the way his own father had once done to him. Ifeoma, he said, his voice breaking. Wherever you go, remember who you are. Poverty can starve your stomach, but never let it starve your spirit. You hear me? Yes, Papa. And Ifeoma, he hesitated, something flickering behind his eyes, something he seemed to want to say but couldn't find the courage for. There is something about you, something your mother and I have never told you. When the time is right, you will understand. But until then, he stopped himself, shook his head, and simply pulled her into a tight embrace instead. She would spend the next 4 years turning that unfinished sentence over and over in her mind, wondering what her father had almost told her. The house in Lagos was nothing like Ifeoma imagined. It rose 3 stories high behind a black iron gate, guarded by 2 men with dogs on chains. Its compound wide enough to fit her entire village square. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers. A swimming pool shimmered blue in the backyard, though Ifeoma would never once be permitted to touch its water. For the first 2 weeks, Madame Beatrice was almost kind. She showed Ifeoma to a small room behind the kitchen, gave her 2 new uniforms, and even smiled once or twice while explaining her duties. Ifeoma began to relax. Perhaps this would not be so bad. Perhaps her father's uneasy eyes had been wrong. Then one afternoon, Madame Beatrice's real daughter came home from her private university in London for the holidays. Her name was Kayamika, and from the moment she stepped out of her car in designer sunglasses, dragging 3 suitcases behind a driver who carried the 4th, the entire household seemed to shrink around her presence. She was 20 years old, sharp-tongued, and carried herself like a queen who had never once been told no. She looked at Ifeoma, the way one looks at furniture that is slightly out of place. "Mummy," she said that evening, loud enough for Ifeoma to hear from the kitchen. "Why does the new house girl look at me like that? Like she is studying me." "She is nobody, my dear," Madame Beatrice replied smoothly. "Poor village girl. Don't mind her." That night was the first time Ifeoma cried herself to sleep in that house. It would not be the last. Within a month, the kindness had drained completely from Madame Beatrice's face, replaced by something colder, something that seemed to feed on Ifeoma's fear the way a fire feeds on dry wood. The work began before 5 in the morning, and did not end until well past midnight. Ifeoma scrubbed marble floors on her knees until her fingers bled. She cooked 3 different meals a day for a family that ate only a fraction of what they demanded be prepared, then threw the rest away while she went hungry in the kitchen, forbidden from touching the leftovers. She washed clothes by hand though a washing machine sat unused in the laundry room. Madame said hand washing was more thorough, but everyone in that house knew the truth. She simply enjoyed watching Ifeoma suffer. If a plate was chipped, Ifeoma's pay for that month was withheld. If Kayamika misplaced her own earring, Ifeoma was accused of stealing it, and made to kneel on the gravel driveway under the afternoon sun for hours as punishment, until the little stones bruised angry red circles into her knees. And Madame Beatrice's hands were not gentle either. The first time she slapped Ifeoma was over a bowl of soup that had, in Madame's opinion, too much pepper. The sound of it echoed through the kitchen, and Ifeoma stood frozen, one hand pressed to her burning cheek, too shocked to even cry. "You will learn," Madame Beatrice hissed, her rings catching the light, "that in this house you are nothing until I decide you are something. You understand me? Nothing." From that day, the slaps came more freely, disguised as discipline, dressed up as the price for being clumsy, or slow or ungrateful. Ifeoma learned to flinch before she was even touched. She learned to make herself small in doorways. She learned that crying only made the punishments last longer, so she swallowed her tears until her throat ached with the effort of holding them down. Twice a month on Sundays, she was permitted to call her parents from Madame's landline, always with Madame standing close enough to listen. Ifeoma would press the phone to her ear, hear her mother's warm voice asking, "How is Lagos treating you, my daughter? Is Madame good to you?" And Ifeoma would look up, meet Madame Beatrice's warning stare, and whisper, "Yes, Mama. She is very good to me." Every lie cracked something inside her. But she thought of her father's medicine, her mother's debts, the school fees waiting for her at the end of this arrangement, and she swallowed the crack down with everything else. She might have survived like that indefinitely. A girl slowly disappearing inside her own silence. If not for a single afternoon 18 months into her stay, when she was sent to clean Madame Beatrice's private study, a room she had never before been permitted to enter. It happened by accident. Madame was hosting a large luncheon for her society friends, and in the chaos of preparation, she forgot to lock the study door behind her when she stepped out to take an urgent phone call. Ifeoma, carrying a stack of freshly ironed curtains meant for that very room, pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dim, lined with mahogany shelves and thick velvet curtains that blocked most of the afternoon sun. On the far wall hung a large oil portrait of Chief I.B., Madame's late husband, a stern-faced man who had died 5 years before Ifeoma arrived, leaving behind an empire of oil business investments and real estate that Madame Beatrice now controlled entirely. But it was not the portrait that stopped Ifeoma's feet. It was the old wooden filing cabinet standing slightly ajar in the corner, its bottom drawer left open, papers spilling out in careless disarray, and clipped to the front of one yellowed folder, held in place by a rusted paperclip, was a photograph that made Ifeoma's entire body go cold. It was a photograph of a woman, younger than Madame Beatrice was now, but unmistakably her, standing in a hospital corridor, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Beside her stood a man Ifeoma did not recognize, his face turned slightly away from the camera, and written on the back of the photograph, in faded blue ink, were words that Ifeoma would read 100 times over the coming months, words she did not yet understand but could never forget. The child that was switched. A man's village. 1998. Nobody must ever know. A man's. That was her village. That was where she was born. Footsteps sounded suddenly in the hallway outside, sharp and fast, and Ifeoma's heart slammed against her ribs. She shoved the photograph back into the folder with trembling hands, closed the drawer, and grabbed the stack of curtains just as the study door swung open. Madame Beatrice stood in the doorway, her eyes narrowing instantly with suspicion. "What are you doing in here?" "The curtains, madam," Ifeoma stammered, holding them up like a shield. "I did not know the door was open." Madame Beatrice's gaze swept the room, lingering for just a moment too long on the filing cabinet, before snapping back to Ifeoma with an intensity that made the younger girl's skin crawl. "Get out," she said quietly. Too quietly. "And if I ever find you in this room again without my permission, you will regret the day your poor mother gave birth to you." Ifeoma fled from that study with her heart hammering so violently she thought Madame must surely hear it. But it was not fear alone that clawed through her chest that afternoon. It was a question. A terrible, impossible question that would not let her sleep, that followed her through every scrubbed floor and every silent meal for the following weeks. The child that was switched. A man's village. 1998. She had been born in a man's. In 1998. What if the girl Madame Beatrice had raised as her own daughter? Cold, cruel, entitled Kayamika, who looked down on Ifeoma like she was less than the dust beneath her designer shoes. What if Kayamika was not the child Madame Beatrice believed her to be? And what if the truth of who truly belonged in that marble mansion, who truly carried the blood that Chief Ibe's empire was built to protect, was standing right now in a servant's uniform, scrubbing floors on her bleeding knees? Ifeoma told no one what she had seen. Not her parents, on their monitored Sunday calls. Not the two other house helps who worked alongside her. Afraid that even a whisper of it might somehow reach Madame's ears and bring down a punishment worse than any she had yet endured. She carried the secret alone, a stone in her chest, growing heavier with every day that passed. But secrets, especially secrets that powerful people have buried for decades, have a way of clawing their way back into the light, and they rarely wait for a convenient moment to do so. 6 months after Ifeoma found that photograph, on a humid evening in the rainy season, a car pulled through the compound gates that would set the next terrible chain of events into motion. A car belonging to a man Ifeoma had never met, but whose arrival Madame Beatrice clearly dreaded with every fiber of her being. If you are starting to feel that ache in your chest, that feeling that something enormous is about to break loose, do not scroll away now. Comment below the word truth. If you believe secrets always find their way into the light, no matter how long they are buried. And stay close, because what Ifeoma is about to discover in the next stretch of this story will make you question everything you think you know about family, blood, and the lies people tell to protect what was never truly theirs. The man's name was Barrister Emeka Solari, and he arrived that evening dressed in a crisp gray suit, carrying a slim leather briefcase that seemed to make Madame Beatrice's hands tremble the moment she saw it through the parlor window. Ifeoma, serving chilled Zobo drinks on a silver tray, watched Madame's face transform in an instant. The practiced warmth of a society hostess replaced by something tight and brittle, like glass about to crack. Barrister Solari, Madame Beatrice said, her voice pitched just slightly too high. This is a surprise. You should have called ahead. Some matters, the man replied, settling into the leather armchair without waiting to be invited, are better discussed without warning, Mrs. Ibe. Your late husband left very specific instructions in his will regarding the disbursement of his estate. Instructions that were meant to be reviewed exactly 7 years after his passing, should certain conditions not be met. That date, Mrs. Ibe, is now 3 months away. Madame Beatrice's fingers curled tightly around the armrest of her chair. I do not understand what conditions you are referring to. The barrister opened his briefcase slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he knows he holds all the power in a room. Chief Ibe's will, he said, stipulated that his entire estate, the oil investments, the properties, the shares in Solari Energy Group, would pass fully and unconditionally to his biological daughter upon her 25th birthday, provided her identity could be legally verified through documentation held at St. Augustine's Hospital in Umuahia, where she was born. Should that verification fail to occur, or should evidence emerge that the child raised as his daughter was not, in fact, his biological offspring? He paused, letting the silence stretch, watching Madame Beatrice's face carefully. The entire estate reverts to a trust controlled by Chief Ibe's surviving brothers. I trust you understand the gravity of that clause, Mrs. Ibe. Ifeoma, standing frozen near the doorway with the empty silver tray trembling slightly in her hands, felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her feet. Kayamika's 25th birthday. Ifeoma knew, from overheard conversations, that Kayamika would be turning 25 in exactly 3 months, at the end of the rainy season. Madame Beatrice's laugh, when it came, sounded like something breaking. Kayamika is my daughter. There is no question of her identity that needs verifying. Then you will have no objection, Barrister Solari said smoothly, closing his briefcase with a soft click, to producing the original hospital birth records from St. Augustine's, along with the attending physician's notes, when I return in 1 month's time. Chief Ibe's brothers have already petitioned the family court to demand exactly this documentation. They have waited 7 years for their chance, Mrs. Ibe. I do not think they intend to wait any longer. He rose, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the door, pausing only briefly beside Ifeoma, his sharp eyes flickering over her uniform with mild curiosity before he continued on his way, never imagining that the very girl he passed in that doorway might be holding the answer to the entire fortune he had come to discuss. The moment the front gate closed behind the barrister's car, Madame Beatrice's composure shattered completely. She spun toward Ifeoma with such sudden violence that the girl nearly dropped the tray. "What are you standing there for?" she screamed, her voice cracking with a fear Ifeoma had never before heard in it. "Get out of my sight. Get out." Ifeoma fled to the kitchen, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, and it was there, crouched behind the pantry door, that she overheard the phone call that would confirm everything the photograph had only hinted at. Madame Beatrice, believing herself alone, had dialed a number with shaking fingers, and her voice, when it came through the thin kitchen wall, was raw with a terror that stripped away every ounce of her usual composure. "It's happening," she whispered into the phone. "Solari's brothers are moving. They want the hospital records. You told me those records were destroyed years ago. You told me nobody would ever find out that the real child." Her voice broke off into a strangled sob. "Do you understand what will happen if anyone discovers that the baby we brought home from a man's village was not actually?" A door slammed somewhere upstairs, cutting off the rest of the sentence, and Ifeoma sat frozen on the cold kitchen tiles, her whole body shaking, tears finally streaming freely down her face, not from fear this time, but from the crushing, dizzying weight of a truth too enormous to hold. She was not merely a poor village girl who had been sent away to work as a house help. She might be the true daughter of one of the wealthiest men Nigeria had ever known. A daughter stolen from her rightful place at birth, hidden away in poverty while another child lived the life that should have been hers. A daughter whose very existence, if ever proven, could bring an empire crashing down and unravel a lie 26 years in the making. And somewhere out there, 3 months from now, a court date was already circling closer. A date that would force Madame Beatrice to either produce records that Ifeoma now understood did not exist, or find another, far darker way to make sure the truth never saw the light of day at all. That night, for the first time since arriving in that house, Ifeoma did not cry herself to sleep from exhaustion or humiliation. She lay awake until dawn, staring at the cracked ceiling above her narrow cot, turning over every slap, every insult, every hungry night, every meal on the gravel driveway, and understanding, with a clarity that terrified her, that Madame Beatrice's cruelty toward her had never simply been about class, or poverty, or the careless disdain of the rich for the poor. It had been fear. Fear of a truth Madame Beatrice had buried the moment it was born. Fear that one day, the girl she had turned into a servant might discover exactly who she really was. And now Ifeoma understood something else too, something that turned her blood to ice. If Madame Beatrice was frightened enough of the truth to have hidden it for 26 years, frightened enough to marry her own fortune to a lie this large, then she would be far more than frightened now that a court date loomed and the walls were closing in. She would be dangerous. 3 days later, Ifeoma would overhear a second conversation, this one far more chilling than the first, one that would reveal Madame Beatrice was no longer simply trying to hide the truth. She was making plans. Plans that involved a solution to what she called the immense problem. Plans that, Ifeoma would soon realize with growing horror, seemed to involve her disappearing from that house entirely, and never being found again. The kitchen was dark except for the blue glow of Madame Beatrice's phone screen bleeding faintly through the crack in the pantry door. Ifeoma had come down at midnight for a cup of water, her throat dry from 3 sleepless nights, and had frozen the instant she heard that low, urgent voice drifting from the study across the hall. A voice she now recognized as belonging to a man Madame Beatrice called only engineer. "I am telling you, the barrister will not let this go," Madame Beatrice was hissing. "Chief Ibe's brothers have wanted this estate for 7 years. They are not going to accept excuses. I need the man's problem handled before that court date. Completely. Do you understand what I am saying to you?" There was a pause. Ifeoma could not hear the other end of the call, but whatever the man said made Madame Beatrice's voice drop even lower, colder. "I don't care how. Send the girl home to her village if you must, tell her parents there was an emergency, anything, but she cannot be in this house, in this city, anywhere near a courtroom, when that verification process begins. If anyone so much as looks at her and starts asking questions about a man's village in 1998, everything I have built falls apart. Everything Kayamika has ever known falls apart. I will not allow that. Ifeoma's cup slipped from her fingers and struck the tiled floor with a crack that seemed to explode through the silent house. The study door flew open so fast that Ifeoma barely had time to duck behind the refrigerator, her heart slamming against her ribs so violently she thought it might give her away on its own. Madame Beatrice's silhouette filled the hallway, phone still pressed to her ear, her head turning slowly, scanning the darkness with the sharp instinct of a woman who had spent decades protecting a secret with her life. "I'll call you back," Madame Beatrice said quietly into the phone, and the line went dead. For nearly a full minute, she stood motionless in the hallway, listening. Ifeoma pressed herself flat against the cold refrigerator door, not daring to breathe, watching Madame's shadow stretch long and thin across the kitchen tiles. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. A dog shifted in the compound outside. And still Madame Beatrice stood there, waiting, as if she could smell fear the way a predator smells blood. Finally, she turned and walked back into the study, and Ifeoma heard the soft click of the door closing. She did not move for another 10 minutes. When she finally crept back to her room behind the kitchen, her legs were shaking so badly she had to grip the wall for support, and when she lay down on her narrow cot, sleep did not come. Only the echo of those words, circling endlessly through her mind. Send the girl home to her village if you must. Handled. Completely. She understood, with a certainty that turned her stomach to ice, that handled did not mean a bus ticket back to a man's. Women like Madame Beatrice, who had built empires on lies and buried secrets beneath marble floors, did not simply send inconvenient truths home on public transport. They erased them. By morning, Ifeoma had made a decision that terrified her more than anything Madame Beatrice had ever done to her. She would find proof. Real proof. Not just a photograph glimpsed in a locked study. Not just fragments of overheard phone calls that could be denied or explained away. But something undeniable. Something that could protect her if Madame Beatrice's plans for her turned violent. Something that could, perhaps, finally answer the question that had haunted her since childhood. Her father's unfinished sentence, spoken the morning she left for Lagos. "There is something about you. Something your mother, and I have never told you." She began carefully, cautiously to watch. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The way Madame Beatrice sometimes stared at her across the dinner table when she thought no one was looking. An expression somewhere between guilt and calculation. The way the household driver, a quiet older man named Baba Sunday, sometimes looked at Ifeoma with something like pity, as though he knew a truth he was too afraid to speak. The way a framed photograph in the upstairs hallway, Madame Beatrice and Chief Ibe on their wedding day, showed a much younger Madame standing beside a man who did not, now that Ifeoma studied it closely, share a single feature with Kayamika. Not the sharp jawline. Not the deep-set eyes. Not even the particular shape of the ears, which Ifeoma had learned in her secondary school biology class, were among the most genetically distinct features a person could carry. But Kayamika's eyes, narrow almond-shaped, fringed with unusually long lashes. Ifeoma had seen those eyes before. Every morning, in the cracked mirror above the outdoor wash basin, looking back at her own reflection. The realization struck her so hard one morning that she dropped the basin of water she was carrying, sending it crashing across the compound tiles. "Foolish girl." Madame Beatrice's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. "What is wrong with you this morning?" "Sorry, madam," Ifeoma stammered, scrambling to gather the scattered basin before Madame noticed the way her hands trembled. Before Madame saw in her eyes the dawning terror of a girl who had just glimpsed, for the first time, the true shape of her own stolen life. She began writing letters to her parents that week. Letters she did not send through Madame's monitored landline calls, but folded small and hidden inside the lining of her only spare wrapper, waiting for a chance to post them through the market woman who sometimes delivered goods to the compound and might, for a small favor, agree to drop a letter in a postbox on her way home. "Dear Mama and Papa," one letter began, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to tell me the truth, no matter how it hurts. Was I born in a hospital in Umuahia? Do you remember the exact date? Please, Mama. Please tell me everything Papa was trying to say to me the morning I left for Lagos. She never got the chance to send that letter. 3 days later, everything in the house shifted with an abruptness that left Ifeoma reeling. Madame Beatrice announced over breakfast, in a voice pitched with false brightness that fooled no one who had lived under her roof long enough to recognize her moods, that she was sending Ifeoma on special errand travel. A 2-week trip up country to help manage the household of Madame's elder sister in Port Harcourt, who had apparently just given birth and needed extra domestic help. You will leave tomorrow morning, Madame Beatrice said, not looking up from her tea. Baba Sunday will drive you. Ifeoma's stomach dropped. Port Harcourt. 2 weeks. The barrister's court date was in less than 3 months. This was not a coincidence. That night, unable to sleep, unable to swallow the dread coiling tighter and tighter in her chest, Ifeoma slipped out of her room just after 11 and made her way toward the boys' quarters at the back of the compound. You should not be walking around this compound at night, my daughter, he said quietly, using the affectionate term so many older men used for younger women, but there was something different in the way he said it this time. Something almost apologetic. Baba Sunday, Ifeoma whispered, kneeling beside him in the dust, no longer caring about propriety, about the careful distance house helps were expected to maintain from other staff. Please. I need you to tell me the truth. What is happening? Why is Madame sending me away so suddenly? The old man was quiet for a long moment, his cigarette burning slowly between his fingers, his eyes fixed on some point in the darkness beyond the compound wall. I have worked for this family for 28 years, he finally said. I drove Chief IB to his business meetings. I drove Madame Beatrice to the hospital the night she came home with a newborn baby girl. Back when I was still a young man with strong knees and no gray in my hair. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped so low Ifeoma had to lean in to hear him. But that was not the same night she left for the hospital, my daughter. That woman left this house pregnant. She came home with a child in her arms. But I have driven that road to St. Augustine's Hospital more times than I can count over the years, and I know something is wrong with that story. Because on the night she claims to have delivered her baby, she was not even in Umuahia. She was in a man's village. Ifeoma's breath caught in her throat. I was young then, Baba Sunday continued, his voice thick with the weight of decades of silence. I did not ask questions. A driver who asks too many questions does not keep his job for long in a house like this. But I have never forgotten that trip, and I have never forgotten how frightened Madame Beatrice looked that night. Sitting in the back of the car with a baby wrapped so tightly in blankets, I could barely see her face. And I have never forgotten, he said, turning finally to look Ifeoma directly in the eyes. The name of the small village we drove through that night. The village where we stopped for nearly 3 hours before continuing on to Lagos. A man's. The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, its edges soft with age, and pressed it into Ifeoma's trembling hands. I kept this, he whispered. I do not know why. Perhaps some part of me always knew that one day, the truth would need a witness. Ifeoma looked down at the photograph under the moonlight, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. It showed a much younger Baba Sunday standing beside the old black car, and beside him, holding a bundle wrapped in pale blankets, stood a young nurse in a hospital uniform Ifeoma did not recognize, not from St. Augustine's, but from a small government clinic she knew well from her own childhood, the Aman's Village Health Center, the same clinic where Mama Adiz had told her, on the rare occasions the subject ever came up, that Ifeoma herself had been born. Baba Sunday, Ifeoma breathed, her voice barely a whisper, tears already spilling down her cheeks. Are you telling me? I am telling you, the old man said gently, closing her fingers around the photograph, that whatever Madame Beatrice is planning to do with you tomorrow morning, it is not an innocent errand. And I am telling you that you deserve to know the truth about who you are before anyone can take that truth away from you forever. There is a nurse who worked at that clinic, my daughter. Nurse Patience. If she is still alive, if she still remembers that night, she may be the only living witness left who can tell you exactly what happened 26 years ago. She retired to a town outside Umuahia, if my old memory still serves me. Orinta, I believe. If your heart is racing right now the way mine was when I first heard this story, Drop a comment with the number of times you have gasped out loud so far, because Ifeoma is about to make a decision that will either save her life or end it. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do, because the woman waiting in Orinta holds a secret so explosive it will bring an empire to its knees. Ifeoma barely slept that night. She lay on her narrow cot with the photograph pressed against her chest like a shield, her mind spinning through impossible calculations. If she ran now, tonight, before the special errand travel to Port Harcourt could begin, would Madame Beatrice's men find her before she reached Orinta? If she waited, obeyed, climbed into Baba Sunday's car in the morning as instructed, was she walking willingly into a trap from which she might never return? She thought of her father's unfinished sentence. She thought of her mother's warm voice on those monitored Sunday calls, always asking, "Is Madam good to you?" She thought of 4 years of slaps and hunger and kneeling on gravel, for years that suddenly made a terrible, twisted kind of sense, because how much easier is it to hate someone, to punish someone, to erase someone, when some deep part of you knows that erasing them protects everything you have stolen? By dawn, she had made her decision. She would go along with the trip to Port Harcourt, but she would not stay in Baba Sunday's car past the outskirts of Lagos. The old man, with his own quiet complicity in a truth long buried, had already offered, in a voice trembling with old guilt, to help her disappear at the first opportunity, to drop her near a bus park where she could catch transport toward Orinta instead of continuing on to Port Harcourt. "I am an old man," he had told her before she returned to her room that night, his eyes wet in the moonlight. "I have carried this silence for 26 years, and it has weighed on me every single day. Let me do one right thing before I die, my daughter. Let me help you find your truth." The morning came gray and heavy with the promise of more rain. Ifeoma packed her small bag with trembling hands. One change of clothes, the folded letter she had never sent to her parents, the worn photograph Baba Sunday had given her, and a small amount of money she had managed to save, hidden inside the sole of her second pair of shoes. She said goodbye to no one. Madame Beatrice did not come out to see her off. Kayamika was still asleep, as she always was until well past noon. Only the compound dogs watched, straining against their chains, as Ifeoma climbed into the back seat of Baba Sunday's old sedan, and the gate creaked open before them. They drove in silence for nearly an hour, the city slowly giving way to the outskirts, tall buildings shrinking into scattered rooftops and open fields. Ifeoma watched the road behind them constantly in the side mirror, her heart lurching at every dark car that seemed to linger too long behind them, every motorbike that slowed near their bumper. It was just past the toll gate leaving Lagos State that Baba Sunday's phone rang, and Ifeoma watched his weathered face tighten as he glanced at the screen. "Madam," he said quietly, answering the call on speaker so his hands could remain on the wheel. "Where are you now?" Madame Beatrice's voice crackled through the small speaker, sharp with an urgency that made the hair on Ifeoma's arms rise. "Just passing the toll gate, madam. Traffic is. Turn around." Baba Sunday's foot eased instinctively off the accelerator. "Madam. I said turn around. Bring the girl back to the house immediately. There has been a change of plans." Ifeoma's blood ran cold. Beside her, on the passenger seat, she saw Baba Sunday's hand tighten around the steering wheel until his knuckles paled. "Madam, we are all ready." "Are you questioning me, Sunday?" Madame Beatrice's voice cracked like a whip through the speaker, and for a moment,